Thank you so much, Patricia. I hope you can hear me. Can you hear me? Very good. Hi, everyone. I'm Congresswoman Terri Sewell from Alabama's 7th Congressional District, which includes Birmingham, where I am tonight, Montgomery, and my hometown of Selma, Alabama. Thanks so much for having me tonight on this, the 55th anniversary of the passage of the Voting Rights Act of 1965. It would be impossible to celebrate the 55th anniversary of the Voting Rights Act without first acknowledging the passing of my dear friend and my hero, voting rights legend and civil rights icon, John Lewis. John was instrumental in getting the Voting Rights Act across the finish line. As he often would say, he gave a little blood on a bridge in my hometown so that all Americans could have the right to vote. You know, not only am I a daughter of Selma, I am also a lifetime member of the historic Brown Chapel AME Church, where the marchers gathered 55 years ago to march across the Edmund Pettus Bridge. Growing up in that little church, I would see year after year the foot soldiers, John Lewis, Juanita Abernathy, Amelia Boynton Robinson, Coretta Scott King, Joseph Lowry, C.T. Vivian, and the list goes on and on. I saw them as a child when I was singing in the children's choir. I saw them as a young adult when I was an usher. And never in my wildest dreams would I ever think that I would get to walk the halls of Congress as Alabama's first Black Congresswoman, seeing all of these foot soldiers, knowing that I am a direct beneficiary of their sacrifice and of their legend. It is an honor for me to be with you tonight as we not only pay tribute to the 55th anniversary of the passage of the VRA, but all Black elected officials and women elected officials owe their very existence to those foot soldiers like John Lewis that had the audacity to walk, to march, to run, to be bludgeoned on a bridge so that every American would have the equal right to vote. When I think about John's legacy, there is no greater legacy than we can do for John Lewis than to ensure that the Voting Rights Act of 1965 that was summarily gutted by the Shelby versus Holder decision is once again restored. And only we in Congress can do that. As we reflect upon John's unparalleled legacy and his life's work, we must redouble our efforts to fight for the cause that he held nearest to his heart. That was the cause that he marched for and risked his life for, voting rights. John understood that progress is elusive and that each generation must fight and fight again for inequality and to fight against inequality and to the realization of the sacred rights enshrined in the Constitution. Just this past year, I was honored to lead the seminal piece of legislation, H.R. 4, the Voting Rights Advancement Act, which, because you went to the polls in 2018 and elected a Democratic House majority, we finally passed. I introduced this legislation in 3 successive Congresses, but only because you all went to the polls and voted did we elect a House Democratic majority led by Nancy Pelosi. And we sat and voted on December 6th for H.R. 4, the Voting Rights Advancement Act that would restore the full protections of the Voting Rights Act of 1965. I am honored to say that last week we renamed that legislation the John Robert Lewis Voting Rights Act of 2020. It now sits on the desk of Mitch McConnell, along with 275 other bipartisan bills that he refuses to take up. I find it the height of hypocrisy that Mitch McConnell would honor John Lewis in the nation's capital during the ceremony of his lying in state with such accolades and all kinds of flowery words. What we need is action. We need the Senate to take up the John Robert Lewis Voting Rights Act of 2020 and pass it into law and fully restore the Voting Rights Act of 1965. Because the reality is that we have not yet achieved the America that John dreamed of. The Supreme Court's Shelby versus Holder decision gutted the enforceability of the Voting Rights Act. And without federal protection against discrimination, states across this nation have enacted new voter suppression and intimidation tactics. In fact, we currently have a president who openly rails against mail-in voting in the midst of a pandemic, no doubt. We have state legislatures, 25 in fact, that have worked hard to put up more restrictive voting restrictions since the 2013 Shelby versus Holder decision, reducing polling places and polling hours. And we have secretaries of states actively purging voter rolls. There is a lot we're working on in Congress, but we realize that rarely does change come from the halls of Congress. It comes from the streets, from grassroots activism. It comes from Americans demanding change, like John and those foot soldiers did those 55 years ago. It comes from passionate women like you all, casting your ballots, making sure our families and friends cast their ballots. Because we know we must turn out the vote in November. And I believe that John's legacy and his vision will be uplifted and fully restored under a Joe Biden presidency. Not only does Joe Biden have a long proven record in both protecting and furthering John's quest for justice and equality, but he is the best candidate to take on Donald Trump, who is the biggest threat today to John Lewis's legacy and the legacy of those foot soldiers. At every turn, President Trump and his administration have worked to advance policies contrary to the issues central to John's life, equality and justice. The Trump administration has worked to strip millions of Americans of their health insurance protection, supported efforts to make it more difficult to vote, torn families apart, expanded partnerships with private prisons, proposed trillions of cuts in Medicare and Medicaid, cut food assistance for hungry families, and yes, even today, they are working to not fully extend the unemployment federal pandemic $600 a week for unemployed Americans. This is a travesty. Throughout Joe Biden's career, both in the Senate and as vice president in the Obama administration, Joe Biden has actively worked with Americans from across all communities, creating consensus where there seemingly was none. And over again, Joe Biden has proven his commitment to the issues that you and I hold dear. Joe Biden has passionately been an advocate for voting rights. During the 1982 reauthorization, he led the charge in the Senate as the chair of the Senate Judiciary Committee in passing the renewal of the Voting Rights Act of 1965. His commitment to voting rights has not wavered, and his commitment to voter protection a foundation. I know that with a Joe Biden presidency, he would vote and sign into law the John Robert Lewis Voting Rights Act to fully restore the full protections of the Voting Rights Act. We as a nation must unite behind a presidential candidate whose commitment to civil rights, voting rights, equal opportunity, and prosperity for every American is clear. We must reject the hatred and bigotry and abuse of power emanating from our current president and restore integrity and decency to that office. I truly believe that Joe Biden is our man, and he will make the best president. I am proud to be a member of the Congressional Black Caucus. And along with your next speaker, the Honorable Eddie Bernice Johnson, who is the chair of the Science and Technology Committee in the House of Representatives and has served for more than 2 decades in the House, I know that the Congressional Black Caucus, 55 members strong, would not exist if it were not for the hard work, the blood, sweat, and tears of foot soldiers like John Lewis and so many others. I have always been honored and enamored of the Congressional Black Caucus, and we fight every day as chair of major committees and chair of major subcommittees on behalf of the African American community, seeking that beloved community that John envisioned. With Vice President Biden at the helm, I know we can build an America where the vision is of a reality where every American truly has a brighter future. We must recommit ourselves to John's vision of America and remember that our vote is our voice. Never let your voice be silenced. Your voice matters. Go to the polls November. I ask you, I beg you, and make sure, even in the midst of this COVID, when you are safer at home, vote from home. Learn the rules of your state for absentee balloting. Make sure you meet every deadline so your vote counts. It's critically important, not only to further the vision of John and those foot soldiers, but for future generations yet unborn. We must go to the polls and elect President of the United States, Joe Biden. I know this group is working hard to do that, and I'm honored to be here on this, the 55th anniversary of the Voting Rights Act of 1965. As a daughter of Selma, to say, march on. Let us remember John's words. He was very clear. He gave us the path. He told us, never give up, never give in. Keep your eyes on the prize and keep the faith. Thank you.